tutorial, we'll see a quick overview of special features of DEFlicker, since it's not possible for every shot to be perfect with just the default settings. We made 2 introduction videos before this one that you might want to watch first. In the DEFlicker time-lapse tutorial, we saw that we could identify those big flashes with the help of auto levels and then remove them with either time-lapse or high speed, depending on the content. Now that the art director saw that, he's asking if it's possible to remove the background shimmering as well. This is probably possible, but it might require 2 passes. One to handle the large flashes that we saw in the last tutorial, and one to filter out the small shimmering that's left on the footage. This is the original, and this is where we're at with the footage now. Similarly, a viewer of our tutorial videos asked if something could be done with the shadows in the time-lapse example, where we've reduced the intensity of the rolling clouds casting intermittent shadows. The answer is the same. It might require 2 passes. This sort of shot, where the issue varies so much over time, often works best by a divide and conquer method, where you would first get it closer to you want it to be. Since rendering 2 passes that have to recompute each time you make a change can be a bit non-interactive, it's best to pre-render the first pass in a way that won't degrade anything. Luckily, now, inside After Effects is just what we need. We can take that first pass, the one called First Pass, and we can right mouse click and select Cache Work Area in Background. This will utilize the persistent cache in After Effects and speed up the interaction for us by remembering what it's already rendered once. You need to have Disk Cache enabled in Preferences, Media, and Disk Cache. Now we can make a new comp with Pass 1. We'll call this Pass 2. The blue bar represents that it's playing from cache. Again, if you're wondering why we're doing all this with the cache and why we can't just apply the second instance of high speed after the first instance, although it is possible, it might be really slow. What's going on here when we cascade 2 tools that work over multiple frame range, as indicated by the number we enter in the time window, is that if the window is 3, for instance, that's 3 frames on either side of the current frame, and when you multiply that by 2, or however many instances you have, a small tweak becomes slow to respond. This is why using cache becomes a time-saving solution. Retrieving a frame is a lot faster than recomputing it. Also, because of the same phenomena, the multiprocessing option might not be very productive in such a case. Since the render is divided into separate processes without shared memory of what it's already rendered once. So for this, it's usually better to also turn off the option Render Multiple Frames Simultaneously in Preferences, Memory, and Multiprocessing. Okay, now that we have all the technical workflow issues out of the way, let's see the rest of the settings after we add the new instance of high speed and change the time window to 3. If we look closely at these monkeys, or whatever they are, there's quite a difference between one frame and the next around their hands because they're moving so fast. So this might be a good time to start using the Refine option in the refinement mode. We'll see more detail than just a blur when it's off because it's very localized where the motion is. You can see the difference. If you want to see where the refinement is going to happen, you can turn on Refine Visualize, and the red area is where the refinement will happen. We could adjust the refinement percentage if you want more or less refinement than you see happening. Actually, if we advance a few frames forward and backward, we can see that it might be enough. We might be in good shape. Now let's look at another example. This soccer footage, you can see as it plays, the lights are pulsating. We can add DEFlicker high speed to this shot and use the noise clean method, as we saw earlier, as the field is really noisy. Now the lights are still breathing a bit. Okay, now we can try out that pulsating highlights option under refinement mode. If I select Refine Visualize, you can see that it marks this area as a special region. And adjusting the threshold here is important because we only want to hit the highlights without going over it too much. Making sure it's just the lights, not the girl, because it will make the highlights the same size on each frame so they don't pulse. We can also adjust the max change to 100%. We might want to break this into 2 passes though, because the highlights are still a little contrasty. We can make the time window on the first pass 1 and then add high speed again with another time window of 1. Note, because we have 1 from the first pass plus 1 from this second pass, that's effectively a time window of 2. We'll use the noise clean method. We can also use the pulsating highlight method on the first pass, and then the second pass we can leave refinement off. The second pass is to smooth the highlights edges. Now we can see the result. Here we have some video taken in a garage, and you can see that the dark frames are so degraded due to compression that we can't see any detail. We're going to start with DEFlicker auto levels. We are going to analyze this shot, and we only want to work with the bright frames because there's so much compression in the dark frames. Let's take a look at the graph it generated. Great, we see that it has an alternate cycle. It's not always obvious, in this case because the darker frames are so blocky, raising their levels to match the lighter frame might not look great. So we can just eliminate the even frames or the odd frames. In this case, we will filter out the odd frames, so we just select Use Only Even Frame Number. This will replace the filtered out frame by an interpolated frame that's created between the 2 even frames. Now we can add DEFlicker high speed to remove the rest of the artifacts. We'll make a time window of 3 and choose the noise clean method. We can select medium for the motion analysis scale and the max change percentage to 100. We can also play with the gamma control a bit. Here's the before and after. In this last example, we have a similar problem with this shot, except in this lighter frame, we can see a bit of banding. If I advance frame by frame, you can see it coming in and out. Take note of that, okay? So first we're going to apply DEFlicker high speed, just using the default setups. Since the default mode doesn't handle noise, even though it's pretty good, we can still do something about that sizzling in the red lights. We can try the denoise method. Okay, now the lights look good, but the floor wiggles a little on the bottom right on some of the frames. This is due to the reflections on the glass combined with the floor changing levels. So let's go back to that trick we just saw in the previous example. This time we can filter out the light frames. Now let's render it. And you can see that this looks better. So just to recap, in this tutorial we saw some special case scenarios and the ways to deal with them by using some of the advanced features in auto levels, high speed, and time lapse to get better results.